Bobby Hopewell,
Present.
Sakia Lee, Jonathan Pulley,
Here.
Patrice Griffin,
Here in Kalamazoo.
and Kim Hollers.
Present.
Alyssa Stewart and Carol McGlynn notified me that they will be absent today.
Okay. And the Vice Mayor reminds me there is a protocol for public meetings and roll calls. So you have to state where you're at, what county you're in actually. So I'm going to have you do that one more time so that we are absolutely following the executive order.
All right. Ben Dameron,
Here in Kalamazoo County.
Jonathan Pulley,
Here, Calhoun County.
Patrice Griffin,
Here in Kalamazoo County.
Kim Hollers.
Here, Kalamazoo County.
Don just joined us. Donald Cooney.
You're on mute.
muted, Don.
Yeah.
Sorry, here, Kalamazoo County.
Bobby Hopewell
President, Kalamazoo County.
and Sakia Lee. I think Sakia just joined us too.
Here, Kalamazoo County.
Great. We have a motion to excuse the absent members.
So move.
Moved
Support.
by Cooney, supported by Dameron, I believe. All in favor, aye?
Hi.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. We should have the minutes from our last meeting. Everybody, are there any changes, adjustments, comments about the minutes from the last meeting? Hearing none, may we have a motion to excuse or approve the minutes?
So move.
Moved by Cooney,
Support.
supported by Dameron. All in favor, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed? Motion carried. Sorry, I just lost my agenda. There it is. All right, you have the agenda before you. Are there any changes to the agenda or additions, comments? Okay, I'm going to take that as consensus that the agenda is as it is. Number 5, reports of officers, boards, and committees. Do we have any reports, Mr. Coordinator?
No, not today.
All right. We'll be on new business, item 6, Mr. Ford.
All right. First up, we have Ms. Kim Trent, the Deputy Director of Prosperity for Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. If you all recall, I think it was a couple months ago, the Michigan Poverty Task Force report came out. I sent that to everybody previously, and Ms. Trent gracious enough to come here and talk to us more about that. She's been on the tour talking to folks in the state around the Michigan Poverty Task Force report and how folks can connect to that work at the state level. So without any further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Ms. Trent.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. First of all, I am so pleased to be able to talk to you. First of all, I just love the name of your entity. I love that you're calling yourself and a group of people who care about shared prosperity. I think that is a absolutely wonderful goal. It's something that actually my title is Deputy Director for Prosperity for the state's Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, which is also a new position. I've been in state government since last January. Governor Whitmer created the Poverty Task Force in December of 2019 with the goal of really deploying all of our state resources in an effort to try to identify kind of the causes of poverty and to create strategies to help people who are living in poverty live in poverty with dignity, but more importantly, to have strategies to help people transcend poverty. We know that in the 1960s. There was the War on Poverty that was launched by, certainly Dr. Martin Luther King was a huge advocate. And then we saw LBJ and others who really talked about using federal resources. And then in the last 30 years or so, if not more, there's certainly, I would say 40 years, there has really been kind of almost a systematic kind of vilification of people who are living in poverty without kind of looking at the reasons that poverty exists, the structures that both create poverty and sustain it. And so we in state government want to really take a look at how the state has policies that either hinder economic mobility or just aren't as helpful as they should be. And so the governor created the Poverty Task Force. We had our first meeting in January of 2020. We had a grand plan to go all over the state to really talk to people who were living in poverty about their lived experiences, to work with people whose jobs are to work with people in poverty, to understand what it is that they do and what they're seeing, what kind of trends they see. We had to, unfortunately, because of COVID, do a lot of that work like I'm doing with you today, virtually, through telephone calls. I didn't get to do a lot of the face-to-face that we were hoping to do, but even still, we were able to put together a list of 35 recommendations that we presented to the governor in February. For our first report, this will be an annual report where we talk to the governor about what we have learned. The first year, we really focused a lot of attention on those policies in state government that we thought were not helpful. And so a lot of the work that a lot of things that you'll see in some of I do have a PowerPoint that I can share with you. I'm gonna just pull up my deck if you don't mind, just one moment. But a lot of things we'll be talking about today are the things that we think that state government could be doing better, some innovations that we could try to deploy to help people transcend poverty. And in my division in Leo, a lot of my work revolves around, in addition to the Poverty Task Force, I also have in my portfolio the Governor's 60 by 30 initiative, which is really one of her key initiatives in her administration. The goal being to get 60% of Michigan working adults to have a post-secondary credential, whether that means an apprenticeship for skilled trades, whether it's a 2-year degree from a community college, whether it is a certificate in a high demand job. The idea is we know at the turn of the 20th century, very few people were getting high school diplomas. It wasn't seen as something that was seen as being necessarily necessary for people to be successful. But here we are at into the third decade of the 21st century, and certainly a high school diploma is really, and there's ample research to show that a high school diploma is very rarely enough in a 21st century job market. And so we want to build a better workforce, a better trained workforce. We think that it will help us to attract jobs from external job creators, but then also to kind of give the people who are on the ground here in Michigan opportunities to, when they're better trained, they can be entrepreneurs themselves. So I want to talk to you a little bit about those recommendations that we made in our report. We did it because we think that there are far too many Michiganders who are living in poverty. Many of you are familiar with the Alice report, which is something that United Way has every 2 years. They introduce their number that indicates the number of Michiganders who are struggling. And that's the frame that we use. We're not just looking at the federal poverty guidelines, because we don't really think those are poverty guidelines. Those are pretty much destitution guidelines. What the federal guidelines for poverty is, it's a number that where most people wouldn't be able to live at all. So we're looking at that number. Of course, we want to move people away from that number, but we also recognize that there are far too many Michiganders, about 40%, between 38 and 40% of Michiganders who are having trouble just making kind of the basic bills, paying the basic bills that you need to pay in order to be successful. So, you know, your rent, to have food security, to have healthcare, those kind of things that you need in order to be a productive citizen, in order to live with dignity. Too many Michiganders are struggling to be able to have. And so we, in our goals, our first goal, of course, is to reduce our ALICE population. ALICE standing for asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So in other words, people who are struggling but work every day, have more than one job in many cases, and still are unable to pay for kind of the staples of life. Secondly, we really wanted to build upon this opportunity of having 14 state departments at the table. And, a lot of times, I think when people think about what the state does as it relates to poverty, they think about the Department of Health and Human Services and, the programs that they offer. They may think about my department, the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, because we do workforce development, but they might not think of the other state departments and the roles that every state department has in, really helping us navigate, helping people navigate poverty with the ultimate goal of transcending poverty. So we have 14 state departments that are at the table for our poverty task force. And we really approach this work with a commitment to racial equity, really examining how state policies have led to disparities. This last year has kind of laid bare, particularly in the health field, we saw with COVID-19. I live in Detroit, and the first month of COVID, the first 6 weeks of COVID, I know at least 20 people who died of COVID, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm talking about people I know personally. It was devastating for our city very early on, and it was impossible to ignore that there are, clearly there's not race equity as it relates to a lot of kind of dimensions of life. And certainly when we look at economic equity, race does have a role in that. So we did have a commitment to racial equity as we were doing this work. So the policy recommendations that we have are organized around 5 areas. Benefits, we're really looking at how the state provides support for those Michiganders who are struggling. Economics, education, as I just mentioned, with the goal of moving more Michiganders to kind of access to post-secondary options. Criminal justice, how can we have innovations in the criminal justice system that really examine whether some of the punitive policies we have are preventing people, not just the individual who is justice involved, but their entire family from experiencing economic stability or mobility. And then finally, health, safety, and housing. So one of the key findings that we made in our report is that the way that Michigan, we had welfare reform, of course, as a nation in the 90s, and that created a program called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, TANF. Every state gets a TANF block grant that they're able to distribute. I mean, certainly there are some regulations about how that money can be spent, but there's, pretty wide latitude in the way that those dollars are doled out. Michigan is an outlier in the way that we distribute our TANF dollars. The traditional ideas of what quote unquote welfare is, it just does not exist anymore. We do have very few people who get any cash assistance at all, and the ones who do get so little, no one would be able to live off of the amount that you're talking about, $300 a month around. People are not able to live, simply with those dollars. And we have a lot of rules that are so punitive about even work. Certainly we all value work and how work really allows people to live with dignity. No one is against the idea of work, but we have found that there are patterns. I talked about our racial equity, our commitment to racial equity. We have work requirements to get the few people who do get cash assistance. If you don't check in with your, kind of caseworker at the cadence that they have prescribed, you would find yourself losing your benefits for a month. If you do it a second time, you lose benefits for even more time, up to a year. The third time, you are prevented from ever getting assistance from the state again. And you might just be thinking to yourself, okay, well, if you don't follow the rules, there are consequences. But what we have found is that, first of all, Black recipients are far more likely to be penalized in the system because there is a level of subjectivity in how it is applied. And secondly, again, this is one where Michigan is one of very few states that has this approach. We feel like our approach to TANF distribution is very much about trying to find strategies to lock people out rather than giving people access to help. We recognize that it's meant to be temporary help, but when people need help, as many people have during the COVID crisis, we have found that the way that we have, in fact, we've gone back and retrofitted a lot of our paperwork just in the short term, because there's no way when you're having 15-page documents that people have to fill out in order to get help, there's no way, particularly people who've never had to ask for help before. I think that it has really laid bare how broken a lot of our systems are. So many people who have never had to have unemployment before, who've never had to, tap food assistance before, have had to do this over this COVID-19 crisis. And I think that it has really kind of laid bare how antiquated and how punitive our TANF system is. And so one of the things that we are really pushing, that we are really happy to have bipartisan support for, is addressing something that's called the benefits cliff. And the benefits cliff is what happens when, let's say you're a clerk at Meyer, and your boss comes to you and says, I want to give you a raise. I want you to become an assistant manager. Well, in order for you to take that promotion, you are then going to make too much money to be eligible for childcare supplement. You're going to not be able to get food. You're not going to be, in some cases, you're not going to be able, in some cases, you're going to lose your medical benefits. And there are people who are just saying, I'd rather not take the raise because the cost to my family is going to be so catastrophic, because I'm not going to be able to have childcare. I'm a single mother. I'm working in Myers. Someone has to watch my kid. If I lose my benefits, it's good. I'm not going to be able to have the job at all. So there seems to be bipartisan support to address benefits cliffs, and we're really excited about that. We have 5 recommendations in the report that deal with benefits cliffs, and we do feel like there's momentum on that front. Also, we want to allow people, we want to have more flexibility with those TANF dollars, and we want to explain to people how we use TANF dollars in Michigan, because I don't know that people really recognize that, for example, a portion of TANF dollars are used for college scholarships that people can use to go to private universities and colleges here in our state. And typically, the people who are able to get those scholarships are those who do very well on standardized tests. So what we're finding is dollars that are really intended for the very poorest Michiganders are being used by, in some cases, either middle class or upper middle class, or even wealthy Michiganders are getting these scholarships to go to private universities using TANF dollars. And the thought behind that when they set it up was that, and believe me, I am a huge supporter of college. I don't think there is a better anti-poverty, it's not a think thing. I mean, there's ample research that demonstrates there's not a better anti-poverty strategy than education. And I will say I'm a huge college education person. I actually am a former elected member of the Wayne State University Board of Governors. So I am someone who's a true believer as it relates to college access. However, if someone was going to college anyway because their parents are wealthy, I don't think that money that is intended for the very poorest Michiganders should be diverted from those folks in order to give scholarships to people who do well on standardized tests. And if you look at the track record of who typically does well on standardized tests, they usually come from districts that are well funded and have really good educational outcomes. So it's rewarding people for being wealthy, essentially using money that's intended for poor people. Another thing that I'm really excited about on the economic front in our report is children's savings accounts. We've been having a lot of meetings with, there are 15 different children's savings account programs across the state of Michigan. These accounts are designed to help parents who are who have challenges economically, to give their students, we seed a children's savings account for them and add to it, when people meet certain milestones. This is money that foundations and some communities, foundations have set them up, some school systems have set it up. The idea is that those dollars could be used for children to go to college one day. They could be used if they're in high school, and they, a lot of districts now have pay to play kind of systems as it relates to their extracurricular activities. There's ample research that shows that extracurricular activities, particularly in high school, really help people with the skills that they need, those soft skills that you need to be able to persist in college, do well in your career. Extracurricular activities, I was on every board that I could be on when I was in high school. It served me well when I went to college, and I think that a lot of people who had those experiences, whether it be in sports or whatever, these dollars could be used for that purpose. The idea is children's savings accounts. And then it also helps people with economic mobility when they are incentivized to save their money, incentivized to really learn about kind of financial literacy. And so there are, as I mentioned, there are already 15 of them in the state. We really want to incubate more of them. These are locally controlled, locally financed systems, but we want to set up a statewide infrastructure to help seed more of these. So for example, using our 529 platform for the scholarship program, for savings accounts, helping get to share best practices. If people want to stand up children's savings accounts, I know that there are a few on the west side of the state. We certainly have some, Lansing, the city of Lansing has a children's savings account program, and they've been really successful and have been around for quite some time. We just want the state to play a role in helping to expand those programs. Expanding, as I go out and talk about this agenda, I can tell you, no matter where I speak, the number one thing that I hear from people, even when I go and speak to educators, when I go to speak to just pretty much any sector, the number one thing I hear is that there is a serious problem in the state with housing affordability. I hear this over and over and over again. So one thing that we are trying to do is really right now, the MISTA, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, actually recently had a statewide housing survey, and they're kind of unpacking that right now. But their plan is to develop a statewide housing plan, which I was actually quite shocked to find out there's never been one before. There's never been a statewide housing plan. They're in the process of developing that to really kind of figure out what communities need, and so that we can address, this problem that we have with the lack of affordable housing. One pilot that we have that we wanted to expand was what we call the housing choice voucher for returning citizens. When people leave prison, as you can probably imagine, returning citizens often struggle with finding adequate housing. Lack of adequate housing sometimes does lead to recidivism. You want to make sure that people have an opportunity. There are all kinds of programs that we have to try to help ease the transition from prison to the community, and housing is certainly one element of that. The problem that we have, again, is that there is a lack of affordable housing. So while we have 150 slots for this program, we're actually having a hard time even filling those 150 slots, if you can believe it. So we're working with the nonprofit leadership community, certainly foundations in Southeast Michigan especially, are really thinking about how they can work with community development professionals to kind of deal with that niche. But there's a lack of affordable housing, not just for returning citizens, but for all kinds of Michiganders. So we're really trying to be very intentional about dealing with that. We did put $10 million. We have a community housing fund that MISTA has, that has not been funded for many, many years. This year, the governor did put $10 million into that fund. We are hopeful that with the American Rescue Plan, we can actually increase that amount exponentially, because we know $10 million, while it sounds like a lot to you and me, we know for a statewide housing need, it's not going to go that far, but we're looking at really expanding that with the money that we get from the federal government with the ARP program. And, again, just a full recognition that housing is a major problem that we have to address. Criminal justice is something that we think is really important. It's really been a barrier for people who want to, have economic mobility in our state. A lot of things that we do really unfairly penalize people who are living in poverty. For example, the number one reason that people are sent to jail is failure to appear. So if you get a moving violation and you don't go to court, and you don't go to court for your ticket, or you don't go to court for something that's a misdemeanor, you will get a bench warrant. And then if you have some kind of other situation where you are brought up before a judge, you could find yourself put in jail. And it's really counterproductive. People who are barely there are a lot of reasons that people don't appear in court, including lack of transportation, including that they don't have flexibility with their job schedule. Certainly there needs to be some innovation on the local level. Again, this is going to be more of a local decision because local courts will have to carry out these plans. But the idea being that figure out something that isn't so punitive, because really it's adding to the state's budget, because we're jailing a lot of people that if we had a better strategy, we would be able to help them rather than throw them in jail for particularly things that are just kind of economic crimes, when people are, haven't paid a ticket because they don't have the money to do it, or those kind of things. We also want to really think about diverting people with behavioral health needs away from the justice system, being more intentional about that. We know so many people who are mentally ill and are being incarcerated instead of getting help that they need for their mental health issues. Of course, this is a really big problem. It's not something that's going to be solved with, just one budget or with one, poverty task force report, but it's something that we wanted to put in the report because we think it's really important. I have on here expanding apprenticeship opportunities for inmates, so that when returning citizens do come back to the community, they are trained to work. It will lower recidivism rates. And we are really finding that our apprenticeship programs have been very successful. We have a program with DTE Energy to train people who are about to leave prison for lineman jobs, where they're making a really solid living, kind of coming out of prison. Right now, all of those prison programs are paused right now because of COVID-19. But even as they're paused, we are looking at expanding some of these opportunities, particularly in some of our women's prisons. Again, expanding addiction treatment is something that we think is really important. We have entire counties in Michigan where there is not one trained psychiatrist on the ground. There are no addiction treatment facilities. We really have to figure out, because it's not as if addiction is limited to just a few counties in our state. It's something that every county in the state is grappling with. There are different drugs of choice. Some people are using opioids. Other people are using, traditional opiates. Some people are even, there's some communities where there's more, alcohol addiction. So, but we have to be intentional about that. We do have an opioids task force in the state that's looking at that dimension of it, but we realize that that is not the totality of the need. And we recognize that the state needs to be more involved in trying to figure out how to expand the availability of treatment. And then also for non-custodial parents who pay child support to their child's parent, if that parent who is the custodial parent gets any state resources now, if they get FIP dollars, they are finding themselves, that money doesn't go to the child, it goes to reimbursing the state. we think that we need to have a pass through so that if a parent is trying to be responsible and pay for their children, that money that they pay really should go to the child for the child's upkeep. And then on the education front, we certainly, one of the governor's #1 priorities, I think one of her top 3, if I were to guess, priorities in the state is certainly expanding access to childcare, income eligibility for childcare support from the state, so that more. We saw during COVID-19, we saw a recession that resulted because of it, but a lot of people are calling it a she-cession because so many women left the workforce during COVID-19 because they didn't have, affordable, safe childcare options for their children. They had concerns about sending their children back to childcare. We want to make sure that we're having more options for parents, that those options are affordable. And I want to tell you about one of the pilots that we're doing right now. It's called TriShare, where in certain communities right now, we have people on the ground who are helping employers who want to offer an incentive to their workers if they are willing to pay 1/3 of childcare costs, and the worker shares 1/3, the worker who's a parent shares 1/3, and then the state kicks in 1/3. The idea being to make childcare more affordable, so that this is beyond just being something that is helping more children have access to childcare, more parents have access to childcare. It also is a talent issue because it's really helping employers who want to have talented workers who are reluctant to work because of their childcare needs. It's really helping them to attract those people back into the workforce. So that's something that we're really very excited about. It's in 3 locations in the state right now. And then we also are really pushing to expand school breakfast programs. Of course, we know every school district has school lunch programs if they have a level of eligibility within their ranks. We really want to expand school breakfast. There have been a lot of studies that show that when children have access to breakfast foods, they just learn better in the morning. It's just better for their productivity. And we want to really also, when we say breakfast after the bell, a lot of schools do have breakfast programs, but they're offered before school starts, which is challenging, particularly for people who are low income, because a lot of them, again, their transportation issues, their work issues, there are a lot of reasons that it might be difficult for them to get their kids to school early. Plus, there's a stigma issue. If you're going into school early because you want to eat breakfast, we want to expand the availability of children being served after the bell rings, so that there are more children who have access to those food opportunities. So that's just kind of a quick overview of some of the proposals that we have. Certainly that's not everything, but we really try to look at the policies that we had in state government that, again, we thought were really creating barriers for people, and really try to work to remove them. As a first step, I really think that the benefits cliff issue is something that we do have a lot of support for. We're hoping that we're going to have some movement on that. And if you see some proposals in the report, I think that I heard Kevin say that he did forward the report to all of you. If there are elements of the report that you think are have merit, that you would like to use your voice to help us amplify, I would love to talk to you. Did I push share again? Because if I did, I didn't mean to. Oh, what am I doing here? Oh, I'm sorry. If there are elements of the report that you agree with, that you'd like to have a further conversation with me, I would love to share my contact information. I'd love to, if you have other organizations that you'd like me to speak to, and we can get you in the loop so you can hear about the kind of work that we're doing when we are getting legislation passed, so you can know what is happening on the state level. And then obviously with the federal dollars that are coming in, how we are trying to leverage those dollars to help move forward this agenda. And with that, I don't know if we have time to answer questions, but I am willing to do so.
Are there questions, folks? Can you give us a little more detail about how the departments are working together And are there some non-traditional departments that typically don't get into the aspects of direct service delivery, like is transportation doing? So anyway.
No, thank you. That's an excellent question. And usually when I do the whole presentation, I talk about the fact that what we did was my team and I have a very small team. There are 3 of us, sat down with the directors of 14 state departments at the beginning of last year and talked to them about, if in a perfect world where money was no object, what kind of innovations would you like to see us use in your department, using your department to help deal with poverty in our state? And then also, who are the innovative thinkers in your department that we can pull together for work groups? And so we had those 5 work areas that I talked about: benefits, economics, education, criminal justice. We had people come together, health and safety. We had people come together in work groups. And the great thing about the work groups is that we had people from a lot of different departments, so that there would be, kind of some non-traditional partnerships. For example, one of the problems that we heard about a lot is that when people were applying for benefits, the process was just so cumbersome. A lot of times they were filling out 15-page documents. There was an effort within DHHS to be really intentional about streamlining those processes. But we also wanted to, the Department of Insurance and Financial Services, had partnerships with entities that work with kind of the ALICE population who might not know how to access those services. And so we did a partnership with payday lending operations, because people are, no matter what your feelings are about payday lenders, people use them. And actually, the people who typically use them are the ALICE population, people who are kind of right below middle class, who are, just barely making it, who are really struggling with paying their bills, are the ones who typically are using those services. But we wanted to, and when people were coming in to get those loans or payday loans, we wanted to make sure they knew about opportunities for them to get food assistance, or opportunities for them to link into housing assistance that might exist, although, we're struggling with that. But the idea being that trying to partnerships that never would have existed before the establishment of this task force, we really try to be innovative and have people who may have never spoken to each other have these work groups and think about how their different departments could bring ideas to the table.
Thank you. Other questions, Dr. Cooney?
First of all, I just want to say how impressed I am with what you're doing. I think it's really great. My question is, have you looked at other states? Are there other states that are doing some of these things? And where have you found states that are really at the cutting edge of these things?
And that's one of the questions when we put together our work groups that we asked of all of our work groups members, when you come back with that idea, can you, go back and see what other states are doing on this front? We didn't want to have any, certainly we're great with ideas that are generated here in Michigan that have a unique Michigan feeling, but there's that saying, there's nothing new under the sun. There are elements of almost every idea that other people have either tried or thought about. Even the 60 by 30 agenda, the state of Tennessee, one of our elements of that is a program we have called Michigan Reconnect that gives free college tuition to anyone over the age of 25 who wants to go back and get a degree. Tennessee has been really successful with programs like that. We kind of took a look at what they were doing there, and then kind of retrofitted it so that it was more applicable to kind of our conditions here in Michigan. One of the things that we looked at with I mentioned that we have, I just told you about Michigan Reconnect. We had another program we have called Futures for Frontliners. Those brave men and women who went to work when a lot of us were able to work from home. I'm still working from home. When a lot of us were able to work from home during the early days of the COVID-19 crisis, those people who still had to go to work, the people who were selling us our gasoline and stocking grocery shelves and cleaning hospitals, who were still going into work every day, we gave them an opportunity to get free college tuition through a program called Futures for Frontliners. But we also recognize that these are in many times vulnerable populations folks who maybe have not been to college ever, who've not really had, or maybe have already had a career or at the end of a career, and have just, hesitation about going back to get a degree. So we recognize that there has to be a lot of wraparound services. So we looked to New York State that had a pilot to really have very intensive wraparound services, particularly for single parents who were returning to school. So the governor was able to get $2 million in our supplemental budget for wraparound services for both Futures for Frontliners and for Reconnect. So we're trying to be really innovative about, trying to figure out how we have success. And to me, as I mentioned, I used to be on the board of Wayne State University, and every year we would get a report about our enrollment numbers, and people would rejoice because typically our enrollment went up almost every year that I was there, and everyone would be excited. And I never cared about that number, because for me, the only number that mattered was our retention and graduation rates. If you take people in, that's a great thing, but then I feel like you have a responsibility to do everything you can to ensure that they graduate. And so, I take that same approach with our 60 by 30 programming. I think it's wonderful that we had 80,000 Michiganders who signed up for Futures for Frontliners. We're getting a lot of attention for Reconnect, but if we don't offer those services and those supports to help people actually get those credentials, it's really for naught, in my view. So we're trying to be really innovative about making sure that we're giving people the supports that we need. And we're looking at what other states have done when they've been successful on that front.
Are there other questions by committee members? Are there other questions by anybody that's on, that's in the group and the pictures here? Okay, Mr. Ford.
Ms. Trent, thank you for your time, all the information. I will share Ms. Trent's contact with the group and everybody attended today. If you want to go through the task force report, anything comes up, we'll have that connection. Again, if there's no questions, I thank you for your time and information you shared with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I look forward to talking to you. Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, 6B.
All right, next is presentation about the community data system. We have some members from Upjohn Institute here, folks from WMU, our esteemed Laura Lamb from the city of Kalamazoo. I don't know who will be presenting, but
I can kick us off, Kevin.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Before you take the floor, everyone, I was on a webinar, I don't know if it was with the city, I thought it was, that talked about some etiquette that disabled folks request that we be thinking about when we have these video presentations. I think it was the FFE, if I remember right, the Shared Press or Foundation for Excellence, Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence. So there's a couple of things I'm going to ask for a couple or all of you to look at. Right now, as I see your faces, some of your names are covering your mouths. Disabled folks would really like to see your mouths so they can try to read your lips. So if you take a look at your camera and make adjustments so your lips are higher than the words and that we can see your full face, that helps folks be able to participate that can't participate. If you have poor lighting, I'd ask if you can make an adjustment to that. If your camera is dirty, I'd ask that you make an adjustment to that. And then having mute on as much as possible so that we don't have interruptions. So those are just a couple quick hit items that I meant to say at the beginning, but neglected to do so. So with that, DCM Lamb.
I appreciate that. My name is Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. Another pointer on the topic that Bobby just mentioned is as you're speaking, every time you start speaking to say your name again so people can track the conversation. So again, Deputy City Manager Laura Lamb. I'm going to start with just quick introductions of who we have on the call today to talk about the community data system. From the Upjohn Institute, we have Mike Horgan, President, Randy Eberts, Zach Brown, and Bridget Timoney. And from WMed, we've got Kathy Katari and Joy Pressberry. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background, and then I will be turning it over to the team to be able to walk through the slides in more detail. So for today, our hope is really to give you an overview of the community data system. Some of you have been involved in previous conversations where we've started talking about this, and today is really a chance for us to tell you where we've been, where we are, and I think most excitingly, where we're going, hopefully together. We'll walk through some slides that will show you some real life applications of how the data system can be used to inform decision-making that really help us shape pathways out of poverty initiatives, something that we all share, I think, on this call, an interest in. We'd like to really follow up the presentation with a discussion and get to what questions that you or SPK partners might have and how we might be able to work together with this data system to get answers to those questions. In terms of background, in 2019, Dr. Light had provided the city of Kalamazoo with $1 million grant. And there was two main components to this grant. There was supporting the creation of a data management system. And there was also this idea around best practice research. In both instances, really looking to emphasize how do we increase prosperity for our community. Some of you may recall, we had several members on this Zoom call attend a site visit in Austin that allowed us to explore some data partnerships, but also allowed us to get deeper into the two-generation approach. This trip was supported by the grant, and I really think helped to solidify our resolve that two-generation really needs to be a frame for our focus going forward. Prior to making the grant to the city, Dr. Light had addressed the Rotary. And I wanted just to capture a couple of comments that he made, because I really think it helps set the tone for what we're hoping to accomplish. Dr. Light shared with Rotary, despite all of our community's remarkable work, we have not been moving the needle in the right direction. We need to focus our communal attention in ways we have never done before. We need to track what we do and measure our results, identify what works and what does not, modify or abandon the latter, and expand the former, and we will need to experiment boldly. He added, we have to commit ourselves and our resources for the long term. We have to recognize this is well beyond our own lifetimes, understanding that digging a community out of poverty is a decades-long process and not subject to quick fixes. So with that background in hand, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget, and she's going to dive into the data system a little more. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Bridget Timoney from the Upjohn Institute. And I'll start my piece here with this slide depicting our partners to date. And you can see the current range of organizations and partnerships that we've grown beyond the Upjohn Institute and WMed. We've been in this phase of building kind of the back end of the database, and it's important to emphasize that the value of this data system is only as good as the partnerships that sustain us. And you see there's a number of community partners, local community partners here, as well as the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And again, we hope to grow this group. So on the next slide, we can cover the goal of this project. And our goal is to use data to help program and community leaders plot the various trajectories out of poverty, and to identify equally the forks in the road. We're off to a strong start and with the data system, but it is just the start. And where we build from here will depend upon the community needs and the partnerships that we develop. The data system is not a research project per se, it's a community tool intended to inform decision making. So, as you know, with SPK, the city, local philanthropists, and community leaders are all working hard to improve the lives of people in our community through the removal of long-standing institutional and social barriers. Just for example, fragmented prenatal care causing premature births, or expensive childcare options that lead families to more affordable choices that sometimes lack in quality. To homelessness or unstable housing arrangements that interrupt learning and neighborhood ties. So you can see here, it's about developing partnerships, integrating data along the life course, and identifying the critical questions to help direct energies and critical resources. Kathy and Joy can speak about the data and its potential in the early childhood space. Randy and Zach are going to cover and offer examples about kind of the kindergarten to career space. And what you'll see are some real opportunities within this to use the 2Gen lens with this tool. So on the next slide, this is consistent what we were just hearing from Ms. Trent, that as we all know, the grip of poverty is tight, and it's difficult to break a vicious cycle of intergenerational poverty. Studies show too often that children born into poverty often stay in poverty. And with this slide, you can see, you know, given our local context, 34% of children in Kalamazoo County live in poverty. And this is using kind of the standard federal level definition of poverty. And of those, 41% will stay in poverty as adults. And as you talk about often in our discussions, Black children are nearly twice as likely to live in poverty compared to white children in Kalamazoo. So it's a statement of need about this work that you're very familiar with. And on the next slide, we have the optimal or typical path when considering poverty reduction. And not everyone needs to follow the same pathway, but we want to ensure that as a community that we're building a system and a database that understands the critical decision points that keep our children on that path to success. And equally important, if we know ways to keep our children off the less successful, even detrimental pathways, we can then increase the number who escape poverty long term. So the database is about our ability to follow individual children across life phases and feel it's tremendously important to understanding where and how to intervene. And on the next slide, we can take a step back for a minute. And in order to share what we've been working on the past couple of years and why it's taken this long, we wanted to start where most programs and data systems end, and that's with snapshot data. At present, we have no clear understanding of which pathways lead to success. We have some hunches, but we would like to show this in a database-informed way. We have snapshot data, such as these data points here, and that's great. It gives us the what, but that's only a single point along the continuum that we're looking at. We need to know the how and the why if we're going to show improvements. So on the next slide, many of you have seen this continuum before when we spoke previously. We're looking at a realistic pathway, moving there from the left to the right along the continuum. And we depict here where transition points occur and where some of the forks in the road may veer people off the path, whether it be prematurity, developmental delays, and so on. And together we want to follow cohorts of children and individual students across time and place, and believe that this level of knowledge can help provide the information that can lead to system level change. First, by plotting various trajectories or pathways, and second, by developing opportunity doors, interventions, or systems change at critical junctures, and then evaluate the impact of these changes in intervention. Again, that might interrupt pathways to prosperity. So again, here's the continuum again, and we'll show you just some of the detail of the data that's been collected, the data sharing agreements that have been necessitated in order to integrate this data along the life course. It's about connecting the dots across this pathway. And here we have a variety of data. You can see we have collected birth record data, home visitation data, maternal and child health data. K through 12 data, post-secondary, but altogether we have over 18 million data points, and that'll be growing. And we're at a point where we can use the data to better target and understand programming, to identify and enhance the most critical programs that assist a child, a family, a neighborhood to progress on their pathway. So now we can collectively identify our most important questions in our partnerships that need to be answered, questions that we should be asking to do this work most efficiently. And to give you some more concrete examples of this, the database in use, I'll hand it over to Kathy right now.
Thanks, Bridget. And I'm really happy to actually have been able to listen to the earlier presentation, which was really exciting and informative. I was also really happy to see that home visitation was one of the primary foci of the health services. And my example here is really drawn from work we've been doing here.
Dr. Katari, could I have you introduce yourself?
So sorry. Yes, I know. Sorry about that. Yes. Hi, this is Kathy Katari, and I am from WMU, Homer Stryker School of Medicine. Thank you for the reminder. So I wanted to, the example, so this real life example that we are really lucky to be able to share really emerges from many years of work within the public health system and healthcare system using this home visitation approach. And so we started out years ago with, sort of that single dot, that snapshot. And what we knew was that Black babies here in Kalamazoo County were 4 times more likely to die before their first birthday than white babies. And we wanted to understand, and we again had some ideas, but we also had a lot of interventions that were that we thought should be working to help address that. One of the main ones being these home visitation programs during pregnancy and postpartum. And so we wanted to take a look at to see and assess the impact of these programs. Are they really working? Who are they reaching? So we connected a bunch of data dots, right? Very microcosm of what this data system platform's doing. We connected birth records, vital statistics from across the county. Home visitation data from all of the 6 programs here in Kalamazoo County operating to serve pregnant families. And we were able to look at and identify some really important and critical impacts. Again, some of which were mentioned in the in Ms. Tren's presentation earlier, and including that people who participated in home visitation are more likely to have improved prenatal care access, and that prenatal care itself is associated with improved outcomes, improved weight gain among infants, which is a leading predictor of infant mortality. And infant mortality is important, not just because of the value of the life saved and the value that infant has to bring throughout their life course, but it also, we understand that stands for the health and well-being of our community. It's a marker for the disparity that we see among communities of color here in Kalamazoo County across all systems that we've heard a lot about. What we were excited to see is that when we looked at individuals who had participated in home visitation, we were able to see not only did it improve babies' birth weight, but it also reduced the infant mortality rate among home visitor participants were 75% better among our Black and families of color. They were 50% better among our white families. So we looked at it, its impact both among families of color and white families. We're really able to drill down into looking at that impact. So it allows us to assess interventions that are currently in place, as well as identify gaps in those systems. So that's just a really a quick example, but a really powerful example for what we can learn when we connect some of those data dots with partners like you that is very intentionally looking at interventions and system gaps. And with that, I'm going to pass it on, and I think it's Randy or Zach who are going to take over and talk about this kind of example within the school system.
Randy, I believe you're muted if you're talking.
There we go. Okay, I'm Randy Eberts from the Upjohn Institute, and I'd like to continue on with what Kathy was talking about with respect to the parent's influence on the child. And here we're going to look at the parent's influence on the child's education. And so one of the great things about this community data system is that we've been able, with Kathy's assistance, to link the birth records, that is the records of all the students that go through the city's KPS school system, all the way up to UI wage records, which is the way we understand the employment of individuals. And so here, by looking at the birth records and elementary school outcomes, we can see a number of ways in which the parent influences the child. So what's the fact? The fact is studies indicate a strong positive relationship between parental involvement and student academic achievement. We can use, as I just mentioned, our longitudinal data that Kathy and Bridget mentioned for the city of Kalamazoo, and we can find the parent's income status and education level at the time of their child's birth determines their child's income status and educational achievement by 3rd grade. And so the conclusion here is that really poverty is sustained through education, and it's also broken through education as well. So education can sustain poverty, but it can also be the instrument that we can use as an intervention to break that vicious cycle of poverty. So let's move on to the next slide. I have 3 slides that give a good example of this. The first one is the information we gain from the birth records. And one of the pieces of information is the method by which the parent pays for the birth. Is it by Medicaid, which indicates there's a low income status among the family? Or is it a private insurance payment that indicates that they are employed or they have some type of enough income to qualify for private insurance? And that would be Blue Shield, Blue Cross, or United Healthcare, or many of the other insurance providers that are available here. And so what we find here, if we can link what happens at birth to what's happening in 3rd grade. Now remember, this is the same child. We start with the child was born in 2006, and by the school year 2014-2015, they're in 3rd grade at that time. And we go from 2006 birth date all the way up to 2010. So we have over 3,000 students that are born in Kalamazoo and are in 3rd grade in KPS. So this is a lot of students to work with, actually. And so what we find is that if you were born and paid that those birth expenses but through Medicaid, then over 90% of students in 3rd grade are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Now remember, FRPL stands for free and reduced price lunch, which means it's either free meals or reduced price meals. And this is both under the National School Lunch Program. The first is 130% above the poverty level, and the second is set at 185%, I should say, below the poverty level. Okay. So if you have private insurance, though, that percentage of students in 3rd grade with FRPL is so much less. It's around 30%. So you can see the huge discrepancy here. Now moving on to the next slide, we look at the parents' education. And we can look at both mother's education and dad's education. Now, this is the highest educational attainment that they've reached. So when it says less than diploma, that means they dropped out of high school. They don't have a high school diploma. High school graduate, some college. Now, some college would mean that they didn't receive or necessarily receive a certificate or especially an associate's degree in a 2-year college. a bachelor's degree, and then beyond bachelor's, this means they have some type of professional credential, professional degree as well. And so you can see here that those who dropped out of high school, the farthest to the left, 95% of their students then are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Now, if you go down to a bachelor's degree, that's around 20%. So the education level really determines the probability that a student will be on free and reduced price lunch, the probability that a student will still be in poverty during their elementary school career and into high school and even beyond, perhaps. Moving on to the next slide. What we now do here is not only link up the parents' educational attainment, but we also see how that relates to the third grade reading proficiency of their child. So remember, this child was born in 2006, let's say, and by 2014, 2015 school year, they're now taking the third grade reading proficiency test, the standardized MEP test for this particular cohort. And so here we find that the lower, or on the left-hand side here, if you dropped out of high school, if the parents dropped out of high school, then the child has a very low percentage of passing, or low probability of passing that reading test in third grade. But for those who have a bachelor's degree, then they have a 70% likelihood of being proficient on that standardized reading test. So once again, the parent has a lot of influence on their child as they go through KPS, as they go through their educational journey towards college and beyond, if they make it that far. So now I'll turn it over to, I think Kathy's going to pick up the rest again, right, Kathy?
Myself or Bridget? Bridget, you want to tell me if it's me or you? Sorry. I think it's me.
Yeah, I think these are yours, Kathy.
Yep.
Okay, thank you also. And thank you, Randy. This is Kathy Katari again, and from WMed. And I'm going to talk through some mechanics of where we're at with the data platform system, and so that you can sort of understand what we've done, which is a lot. We've got a lot of data points, where we hope to go next, and kind of what our timeline is. So I want to start out by just identifying that as much data as we've gathered, we still have, we have a pretty ambitious goal, which is to identify and fill in these data gaps at every important point, both across an individual's lifetime, but also the opportunities and the environment around them to layer in information about housing, information about criminal justice that will really inform where there are these pathways out and pathways back into sort of a successful life course trajectory. And one of the things that in addition that we want to identify is this early childhood piece. And we all know the earlier the intervention, the more powerful it has, the more powerful the impact it has. So we're really focused on, from pregnancy all the way on, and want to identify that early childhood and the school years are really critical for the child. And then thinking about the housing stability, health outcomes, and the criminal justice as far as the family context and community context. So want to understand what's going on outside of the child as well. Next slide, please. Want to mention, Bridget mentioned earlier sort of this, behind the scenes, work that's been happening that's taken so long to aggregate this information and put all the pieces into place so that we've got good data that we're allowed to use in the way that is most useful. And so I want to just sort of talk a little bit about the fact that what we're describing today is this, this large scale data platform that has some limitations to who uses it for what, but it also has a lot of opportunities around what what is available to them. We want to thinking about how do we make this data and usage most accessible. And the data system itself is large, but we see dividing this up and trying to increase this usability and utility for the kind of programs and information that you all, but also your agencies and your community stakeholders might find useful. So there's this, we call it this public view, and it would be information that was aggregated up in ways that were informed by the community around what's important to the community, what are trends that are happening that really need to be lifted up and revealed, but also allows us to see some of these neighborhood level impacts and neighborhood level community factors that will allow us to understand the environment within which these are happening. The back-end data system in these private agreements also sort of give us this opportunity to work with stakeholders to evaluate programs, to evaluate systems, to look at transitions not only across an individual's life, but also from one system to the next, like where are those breakpoints? So that gives us some opportunity to look, use this data to both inform some of the program evaluations. We've got some ideas about some really cool future use that other communities have done with such a data system that include allowing individuals to access and manage their own information. So that's just sort of an overview of the sort of the high level way that this is organized in ways that we hope will provide utility for everybody. Next slide, please. We sort of were working with these principles for the data system that we thought was important enough that we wanted to articulate it and give a little bit of in-depth, description around it. The data system, as we've said over and over and over, we're hoping that it's as comprehensive, right? We want it to be follow people across time, across their lives, across systems, so that we can connect the dots that allow us to find out where are folks struggling. Where are folks thriving? Like what are the components of success, right? But also we need to combine information that's meaningful, that is meaningful on issues that are really present and relevant for families in our community, and that is accurate, that has to be valid, accurate information. And I'm going to talk in a minute about our security, but we're really super focused on the security aspect, especially since in order to link all this information, we have to work with individual identifiers. And so we've created kind of this two-tier system that allows us to really tightly manage the security of it. It's been really important to us, and it's taken some time to kind of organize that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then we've got we really need to keep an eye on not just the build of such a data system, but the sustainability. We want this to be reliable, to be accessible, not just today, but sort of over time. And every time we build a layer into it, that means there's work to sort of make that both integrated, secure, but also available in the future. So it's not a one-shot deal. And we're going to talk next just about the challenges that we have overcome. And they're going to really sort of mirror some of the principles that I sort of laid out already. And you'll see more detail in the timeline that follows. But where we are to date and what we've been spending a lot of time doing is we've obtained the data. We've gotten our data into usable format, which requires a lot of work on the behalf of Zach is our champion there. We've linked the data. So you've given you a few tastes for like what linked data can show you and the gaps it can identify, as well as the successes that it can identify. We've created a secure data architecture and platform with different levels of privacy, with the most secure privacy being having access only by 1 or 2 people, and behind multiple technical and human resource walls. And we've designed an architecture that will allow us to keep layering data and new information in. If you want to move on to the next slide, Zach, thank you. So this is sort of a timeline that situates us sort of where are we, what have we done, where are we now? The red star really indicates where we're at this point. As you know, as Bridget and Randy and Laura have mentioned, we've been working on this for a couple of years now, and both starting from the planning phase that Laura discussed, and where we've really identified the vision, the goals, what are the objectives, began outreach to these base partners, right? Financial partners, data partners, community partners, and then addressing, sort of beginning to think about how do we do this build by looking at the regulatory, starting with what are the regulatory requirements, what are the security measures that we need to fulfill, how do we go about fulfilling that, establishing data use through data use agreements that allow us to protect the data, but also share the data and link it over time. And then finally, we're really excited to be at this point, which is we had to build it enough so that we could sort of say we're ready to do this, but we still have a lot of building and can be guided in what we do next. So we're in this testing what we have, at the same time reaching out to core partners like SPK to understand how do we go about, what do we prioritize, what are the questions, what are the areas of focus, what are the suspected gaps, where should we be following, what should we be building next. So as we think about moving forward and establishing this sort of cadence of meetings and being able to sort of share this information, we want us to keep an eye on how is it, what's the utility of it now? Let's make the most of what we have. What do we need to really keep this meaningful and useful in a real practical sense for a variety of our stakeholders, community, agency, institutional, and otherwise? And then what do we need to keep an eye on as we think about how to sustain this for the long term? Okay, next slide, please. So we're ready for your help. You know, we want to make sure that we are asking the right questions, asking them in the right way. We want to make sure that we're disaggregating the information and looking for gaps in populations where we should be, what's really going on in the community, and how do we use data to elevate and highlight the gaps as well as where there aren't gaps. When we start looking at some of the findings and the results, they're as meaningful as they're meaningful to people who, you know, will put them into practice and use them for programming and use them for policy. So how do we understand this in a way that is most practical for you and the community members? And then how do we go about supporting the implementation of interventions that might stem from or be informed by this data? Like, how do we go about doing that? So that's sort of what we are hoping for and where we see the value in this partnership. And then last slide, please. And so really our question to you is sort of, we have lots of questions for you and are happy to sort of be led by you at this point, but we just want to understand what should we be focusing on, prioritizing, what is missing that needs to be there for it to be more meaningful and most meaningful, and how can we work together to both plug those gaps, but also use the data right now in a way that is going to be helpful and meaningful. And I'm gonna open the floor for questions. And I think the comments, concerns, I think at this point, we just want to hear from you.
Okay, if there's questions, I'm gonna have you stop sharing the screen just so that I'll be able to manage everyone's faces in a gallery. Here we go. There you are, all these beautiful people. All right, so I see multiple hands. I'm going to go with Mr. Pulley first.
Hello all, Jonathan Pulley. I am on the committee. Thank you all so much for the presentation. I would start by saying I'm a data nerd. I love numbers, and I know not everyone else does. And so I'm sort of trying to channel some of my non-data people when I ask this question. I think we know that data sort of captures a thing, people, whether it's, you know, to whatever end. How do we ensure that capture the data that tells the story about people that leads towards change. That's at a very high level. How do we make sure that the numbers are reflective of the community that we're advocating for? And also in that sort of that people phase, it has community voice at the center. When you ask the question, what is it? I can't say it was missing, but one thing that I really want to bring to this space is community voice. How do we ensure communities are included in this process, and it's not prescriptive? And I have been around long enough to know that we get a new bike and we sort of just get rid of the old one, or we want to. I think about things from a long-term standpoint. So when I think about outcomes and outputs, how do we make sure that community is at the center of all that we do? I took a lot of notes, but I'll try to condense it. And then I heard it seemed to me a little unclear about how the data would be used, specifically with community partners. I know that this is an asset to you all, but I know when working in the philanthropic space, executive directors, community members, volunteers, data helps inform the work. And I don't want us to burden those who are really committed to the shared prosperity for Kalamazoo to feel like this is another sort of thing that takes them away from the work. And so is there a way to really allow this to be a resource to share, also to provide input in that same process? And I love the visual around the sustainability. I totally get it. You not only do you get a new bike, but you gotta put some WD-40 on it. You gotta take the training wheels off at some point. And I do know it's a process. And so overall, those were the only things that I had and some reflections that I had. Thank you.
Those were awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to comment first and then just defer to my anybody else that wants to weigh in. I bring my experience with Healthy Babies, Healthy Start and with Cradle, and my partnership is the model that I think we are embracing here, which is listening first, right? So listening, what are the suspected areas? What do we think's working? What do we think's not working? And really listening to the people on the front line and understanding what are they saying is happening or not happening? What are their priorities? The people who are actually going to use this, and then go, where can we find this information? Using administrative data, using administrative records that's already being collected and making the most of that is one way. And what we've tried to do here is one way to really make the most without adding burden to people who are already doing so much work. So use it. And I say that's part of our decision to use this secondary analysis. I love that community voice was front and forward, and community voice means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? So I think that we're looking for guidance. We didn't want to get so far that we made decisions about what that looks like or what our focus is or what community is going to be most relevant. So we're at the point where we've built enough to do something, but not so much that we have made a bunch of decisions about what that something is. So part of it is we wanted to share this, but I think just having lots of discussions one-on-one and just listening to the priorities and the guidance from folks who are going to use it like you all. And I don't know if I answered all that, but that's my feeling.
I'll just weigh in slightly. This is Randy Eberts from the Upjohn Institute again, and just say that we have two levels of data. One is the individual participant that we follow over time, and then we aggregate that to a neighborhood or something that we can identify with, as well as begin to I guess for privacy issues, not identify each individual person who lives there. But so, and when you talk about nonprofits and you don't want to overburden them, of course, the nonprofit can be a partner with us and give them, contribute their individual data. But at the same time, they can also use the aggregate data, data that doesn't reveal any privacy issues. And they can use that very, very easily. We'll have a website that has this on it by neighborhood and things like that. And so, we see it happening in two ways. One is if the nonprofit would like to use the individual data to help with their own evaluations or their own understanding. And that's something that they would want to do. So it's not just overburdening them. It's something that they have some wherewithal to do so. And then the second one is, of course, the neighborhood information, let's call it, and they would just have that accessible when they need it.
John, I wanted to just add one point. Jonathan, my name is Mike Corrigan. I'm the president of Upjohn. So I've been associated with this project for a couple of months now, very closely. And I just want to sort of make a very simple point. If you think about the data that was described by Bridget, Randy, and Kathy, they've got birth data going into schools, and then out of schools, they can follow people through employment. So it's a very rich history. But as we all know, as we go through life, there are intervention points that we experience. Maybe it's a big brother, big sister. Maybe it's a home visit. Maybe it is a mentor of some sort. And so when you talked about community voice, part of the way the community has a voice is if there is an activity the community is involved in to help people, and we know about it, and we know the people, we have their history, but we can also look at that one intersection point. We know what's going on with them before, during, and after. And it's the after that's really important. In other words, can we measure impact of intervention by well-meaning and very dedicated city collaborators? And are those impacts actually helping in the goal of trying to reduce poverty? So I know I have a very simplistic view of this, but I think really taking this long history that we have with individuals, if we can couple that with what they experience with the community, I think that's going to have a huge impact in understanding the role of those programs on people's lives.
Ms. Lee, I'd seen your hand.
Yes, Sakia Lee. I am the Children and Youth Goal Team Chair. I also work for the Kalamazoo Promise. So I have a concern mixed in with a question. At the end, I believe it was Kathy, one of your slides said that we would see data by race and by neighborhood. And I know Randy just spoke to some other link that we would be able to use to look at data by neighborhood. I didn't see a lot of information by race today. And a lot of times when we look in the education space, we see things by free and reduced lunch, price lunch, although that breakdown was never given by race either. So with that being stated on the slide that we would be able to see things by race, when will we be able to start to see that? And the information that was shared today, can that be further broken down by race? And I ask this because every time we have a presentation, most of it is not breaking down by race. And so as a person of color, I will always ask this, when do we get to see things broken down by race?
This is Kathy Katari, and I'll take the first stab at that. Thanks, Sakia. So good to see you. So I will say that the home visitation, that slide, it was one of them that was only broken down by race, but it was very broadly broken down by race. And so to be able to, so what we have race for everybody, because we start with birth records. So we have mom race, dad race, race, ethnicity, and ancestry. And we've done a lot of work looking at the different combinations and how those are related to outcomes. But we've also been very much informed by, at least in the home visitation space, folks in the field saying what's meaningful, right? And really what's meaningful within the home visitation world is white, non-white. Like if you have to break it down into two, those are the two groups you're going to break that I've been advised to break it down into. We have a lot more data that allows us to break it in many different ways, however is meaningful to the community or the group that we're working with.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense, Kathy. But for the other slide.
Go ahead. You still got more, Ms. Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I would just wait for the other slides to be broken down by race or some other site or linkage or whatever later.
Oh yeah, well, this is Randy Eberts again from the Upjohn Institute. I just wanted to say that we have 18 million data points, and with 18 million, it's not just the number of students; it's the depth of knowledge about each of those students. And we know, their race, their ethnicity, their gender, just go down the list. And we know, as Kathy just said, the parents' race, ethnicity, ancestry, and all that. So we only gave you a very, very, superficial look at the information that we have available, just to make it simple at first. What I wanted to sort of bring across with the data that I talked about was that, we can look at the same child who was born in 2006 or whatever that period of time might be, or that year might be, and then look at that same child. It's not a different child, it's the same child in third grade. And so with this longitudinal data set, following these cohorts allows us such, information and precision, so to speak. Instead of looking at a whole variety of different children, it's the same child that was born, the same child in third grade, the same child in fifth grade. And if we have a long enough period of time to look at these things, it could be the same child who actually is a parent again. And that cycle then can be either repeated or broken through education, which is our major point of intervention here.
All right, this is Bobby Hopewell. Dr. Cooney, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what you're doing is absolutely wonderful. It's great.
Don, say your name just so they have it.
Okay, my name's Don Cooney. I teach at Western, a couple other things. My question is, are you also looking at intervention points, other models about how people are helped? Kathy mentioned one with the home visitations. Laura mentioned ones with the two families. But are you also looking at models about how we help people at these different stages that are successful?
Definitely, Don. This is Randy Eberts again from the Upjohn Institute. Don, you're right on. We are looking at all those intervention points. I think we mentioned a few of them. One is, let's say third grade, the reading level. The state has put a lot of emphasis on that. Another one might be ninth grade, the dropout period of time, the bunching that takes place because sometimes, students are asked to repeat that grade. And so, we can look, and we also have behavior, not just achievement. We have excused absences, unexcused absences. We have attendance rate. We have a whole variety of behavioral types of things that the KPS also collects for us, or for anybody, for themselves. And so with this information, we're able to do a whole variety of things, and we're just scratching the surface, with the slides that I just showed you and what Kathy showed you too. And I should also say that in addition to, we're trying to find not only the intervention point where, let's say, there's a probability that somebody might be, have some engagement or, brush with the law, and they might be, sidetracked from their educational journey. We can also see about predictive analytics. What happens to in that period of time in which they might go to, let's say, the county jail or something, or get in, a brush with the police. What led to that? And maybe we can backtrack and see if there's anything we can do at that point. Instead of just waiting for that to happen, we can see whether or not there's something that might be helpful along the way.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't see other hands. I'm looking. This is Bobby Hopewell. The next speaker will be Brenda Hughes. Brenda, I'm going to again ask you to see if you can adjust your camera because we can't see your mouth. There we go.
Okay. I have an observation, maybe, and a statement or a question. It occurs to me when you're tracking the educational outcomes along the way, and the results of some of the efforts going on. My question is, have you partnered with the millage that is in the 6th year that was for families with school-aged children? That should show the effect that housing had on that group of people for 6 years anyway. It's in the last year. And one of the many thoughts I had is that this is a long-term tracking, which is what it's got to be. But if we were to ask everybody in poverty or right on the edge of making ends meet, what's the number one help that they could use right now, it would be different right now maybe than it was 2 years ago or even last year or next year. For instance, one of the things that I'm hearing from my kids is that they're back to work, even if their organization is not open, they're back to work. Their school-age children are not in school. And even though we know childcare is a problem, that particular childcare is not available and has not been thought about before because it wasn't needed before. And not only do they need childcare 40 hours a week because of the time that it is, or 50 hours a week, they need help at that childcare to help their children with their online schoolwork. So just occurred to me that this period of time has challenges there that we haven't tracked before, and hopefully won't have to track in the future. But right now, what those parents need is different than any other time, and if we want to help them, we got to help them now. So that's all.
This is Randy Everett from the Upjohn Institute. If I can respond to your question, and I'll just respond in it to one way, and that is that definitely there are situations in which parents who have very few resources face all the time, and these situations change over time because of the circumstances. Who would have predicted the pandemic would have required a different type of childcare than what we typically have had. But one of the reasons that they're in that position where they need assistance outside of their own family is that they don't have the resources, they don't have the cushion that people who have greater means have. In other words, for myself, who, we have, the means to hire somebody for childcare if that's the nature of it, but nobody who we would consider in poverty or an Alice type person would have those means to hire, additional, people to help them with child care. What we're trying to do here is a longer run issue. How do we get people out of poverty so that they don't have to face those issues down the road whenever it might occur? And
I
so
understand
sort of a
that.
short run, long run, I guess, basically. And if we think about the longer run, I think that's where we're focusing a lot of our effort right now by being able to follow somebody for a number of years, through their educational journey to see whether or not they're doing better than their parents did at the time they were born.
Yeah, I understand that, but there's a whole lot of children in that predicament, and there is not enough childcare to pay.
No, right. And there probably never will be either. Yeah. So yeah.
That's a whole different thing.
Sure, that's a whole different thing. So
even the people that can pay can't find the childcare to pay. But
but there are people looking for work, and so it's a vicious circle all the way around, definitely. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's just a need now.
Okay, so this is Bobby Hopewell. Mr. Ford, how long do we have for this meeting? Okay.
Presentation 30 minutes.
Okay, so I think we're beyond that. I know that everyone's excited that we have this opportunity to go through this and get a better understanding of the data. I see Dr. Cooney clapping. That means something because he's been around since the beginning. And I think that you can see it's a robust platform, a lot of opportunities. I know that Deputy City Manager Lamb has mentioned that she's more than happy to connect with us, some of us offline, to try to go through this in a longer way or more detailed way. I'm assuming the Institute folks may be available for that as well. And I don't mean to cut us off. I just know that we are now at an hour and a half. So I'm not sure if we have other agenda items or not, Mr. Ford, but I think we've gotten probably as far as we can today with this. I want to thank the Institute and WMU and all of you folks for this hard work. This is what I was hoping for when I pushed back on, okay, just deliver something that has some meat on the bone, so we're not having these abstract conversations about what could be, but more about what is. I have a number of questions. I'll reserve those for Laura Lamb, and we'll go from there. So, Mr. Ford?
All right. We don't have any
Your name?
unfinished. We don't have, Kevin Ford, City of Kalamazoo. We don't have any unfinished business. No, the only miscellaneous thing, if you all don't know, KPS Equity Task Force has been formed. Our very own Dorla Bonner is a part of that task force. I will send a link with the information to that. It has about 14 or 16 folks from the community, but I'll send a link to that. You can read who's on there. Congratulations to Ms. Bonner. I think she first heard about this from one of our meetings, and it was suggested that she apply. So, we sent good vibes her way, and it turned out all right. So congratulations again. That's the only thing that I have for miscellaneous.
Okay. I have a couple quick things. I'll try to make them quick. We're going to be getting a lot of dollars from the stimulus money from the feds, and how that's going to be used by the city. I'm trying to make sure I understand how that may be used. So look forward to hearing about that as it relates to prosperity. We already have plans. We have Imagine Kalamazoo 2025, which is supposed to be our guide, and we have the SBK plan. So if the city's out there seeking additional ideas, I'm wondering why are we not, enabling the ideas that we have coming forward. So I look forward to hearing about that. And then we heard a lot today from the Institute regarding this data about our young people. And it's been a rough year and a half for our young people. And so I know we just funded a number of organizations to do certain things or whatever, but I think the city and SBK and others needing to get with whomever, KPS or whomever, to figure out what do we need to really be doing this summer and how do we support the summer needs of our young people. And I know we are a 2-gen organization, so whether that's supporting daycare or whatever so that a mom can go to work and blah, 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 whatever that is. But bottom line is we got problems. We're in trouble and our kids are in trouble, and we need to figure out how we're going to dive deep. And we're sometimes good at incremental, but this is the time that we got to bring it hard and strong. I don't know what that is. Not asking for answers now, but we really need to think about it before the summer hits. So I'm asking all the committee members, using your brains, maybe the staff can get us informed if there's already plans and designs that are going on, and how do we advocate or encourage support of the needs of our kids this summer. And with that, I'm going to ask for any public comments. Are there any public comments?
There's no public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Ford, going once, going twice. All right, everybody, thanks for the great meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.